Okay, good morning, everybody. It looks like we've got a number of participants that are rolling into today's webinar. I'd like to extend a huge thanks on behalf of Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer to all of you for joining us early this morning for part of our webcast series, which is really focusing on resuming business in a changed environment. Obviously, this is a very difficult time for all of us, and we're thrilled to have you here today. By way of introduction, my name is Jason Castor, and I'm the Chief Business Development Officer for Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. And I'd like to extend a huge thanks to the Missoula Economic Partnership and to Grant Keir for partnering with us today and having us a part of your webcast to your members. So Grant, what we're going to do is we're going to turn the time over to you. We've got a couple of slides queued up for you. And at the conclusion of your presentation, you can turn the time back over to me. So Grant, thanks again for having us today. We're thrilled to be with you, and I'll turn the time to you.
Thank you so much, Jason. And I just want to extend my thanks to your team at Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, especially to our crew here in Missoula. I want to thank Ross and Liz. From the moment the COVID crisis started until just today, they've been incredible at taking your team's work to understand the conditions in the environment and get us information on almost a daily basis that we've been able to push out to businesses to support them. I am just so grateful for the work that you guys have done and the professionalism you guys have distributed and exhibited, and we would not be where we are as an organization and community without their help, so thanks so much. I am very confident that there's not a business school in Montana and certainly across the country that ever taught a course that said how to manage your business into and out of a global pandemic. So we're all kind of headed into uncharted territory right now, and to limit our risks and to reduce uncertainty, it's really taking a lot of effort and communication across the board. I'm going to start by just kind of talking a little bit about where we are in Montana and here in Missoula. And we are incredibly fortunate as a state right now to have great leadership who responded early and quickly to the COVID crisis. As a result of that, today across Montana, we have just a handful of active cases. We have no new cases in Montana in the last few days. Here in Missoula County, we actually have 14 days with no new cases reported, which is remarkable. I think that's really important is that in addition to those facts, we've really been able to start to develop and expand our testing capacity. We've also been able to ensure that we have adequate capacity in our hospitals and medical facilities. And we've also, as a local community, invested in a facility that's allowed for non-congregate sheltering of folks who develop COVID. That includes our homeless population or people who would not otherwise be able to be at home to be isolated. What these things mean as a whole is that our governor and our county have been able to work together to allow us to reopen. And obviously right now, at a time when reopening provides so many questions, that's really the crux of today is how do we do that responsibly? How can we give businesses a comprehensive way to go about doing that? What we have found is that we're in this really interesting position right now where some of the businesses that we serve are really still reeling economically from the initial wave of being shut down, and others are really just starting to figure out how to reopen. So we're really trying to expand the services that we have to businesses to ensure that we are still providing access to and information about relief and assistance while we're providing as much information as we can about how to move forward. And we're doing that really closely and in concert with our partners in those who serve the business community, our chamber, our downtown partnership, and others. We're doing it in close coordination with our health department and our elected officials, and that partnership and tight level of coordination and communication is, I think, allowing us to get good information out as quickly as possible to the broadest possible audience. I think I will cover later a few additional available and new relief packages that are coming out of our state right now. But just a quick overview. We have our EIDL program, which is still in play with the SBA. Folks are familiar with the PPP. I think at this point, we have guidance on our website that walks through sort of how you can prepare yourself to engage with a lender to access that program through the SBA. We had an update maybe 3 days ago. That program was refunded as it ran out of funding. Currently, I think there's 140 plus or minus $1 billion remaining in that fund. So although there was a mad scramble at first, there is still available funding to support small businesses. So don't hesitate to reach out to our partners in the BEAR program at the University of Montana, who can get you prepared to walk through preparing for the application there. And just today, we had a rollout of new state grants that will help businesses both with incurring the costs that have been incurred or covering losses that have been incurred. And in addition to that, they've created a grant program. And again, these are grants, not loans. A grant program for small businesses that are engaging in innovative practices that will allow them to better adapt to or create new products or services through COVID. So that stuff's coming online. You can find more information about all of that either at our website, MissoulaPartnership.com, or you can find information at the Department of Commerce website. Lastly, I just want to remind folks that in addition to these really big programs, there's a lot of small efforts underway at the local community level to support businesses as well. And our downtown partnership has stood up a great loan program, grant program for small businesses. And there's an opportunity to apply through the Missoula Downtown Partnership and Association, as well as our county commissioners are right now looking at a small pot of funding that may grow over time to support small businesses and nonprofits that are struggling through this time. So the last thing I would encourage folks to do is also remember your trade associations. Many of those are trying to coordinate funding streams to help groups access funding. So that's a quick round out of sort of the status of things, and I'll turn things, one of the things I just would stress right now is we still have a lot of questions coming out of our business community. How do I approach this comprehensively so that I take into consideration many of these new requirements and figure out how to navigate this both in terms of relief, in terms of legal liability, in terms of thinking about the structures I need in place, and really the systems and plans I need in place. I have not seen anyone present a more comprehensive approach to that than Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, and I'm really thrilled to have them here today to help our community prepare as best we can for this, these steps going forward. Thanks.
Hey, thanks a lot, Grant, and thanks for the very kind introduction. We recognize how much, or really the vital role that the Missoula Economic Partnership plays in helping Missoula businesses deal with this crisis. So we want to thank you, your team, and certainly you for your leadership. For those of you that aren't familiar with Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, I will be very brief. The firm was founded in 1882, is headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we have offices in Missoula, which we're very happy about, Idaho Falls, Boise, Idaho, Reno, Nevada, and then one other office in Utah in a small town just south of Salt Lake City called Lehi, which is also referred to as Silicon Slopes, which is the big tech hub industry in Salt Lake City, Utah. So again, thanks to all of you for joining us this morning and allowing us to be a part of this discussion today. I want to quickly touch on the webinar format. As you all know and are probably familiar with, all the lines are muted. We'll accept Q&A as best as we can throughout today's discussion through the chat feature. This webinar is being recorded, and at the conclusion of the event, we will send you a link to the recording as well as our slide deck. So with that, I'd like to thank our team and my colleagues today, Liz Mellum out of our Missoula office, Amy Lombardo out of our Boise office, Susan Mottschiedler out of our Salt Lake City office, and Ross Keogh out of our Missoula office as well. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Ross to kick off our presentation. Oh, one other thing. I guess I have to touch on a legal disclaimer. Today's presentation is a source of general info and should not be considered legal advice. If you have questions about how this relates to your business, you must consult with your legal counsel. Okay, now I think I'm clear to pass the baton to Ross.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Grant, and also Amy and Liz and Susan. It's fantastic to have such a geographic perspective on how businesses can reopen and I think take advantage and really excel in this environment. My presentation today is sort of this, I've been doing these kind of weekly almost and kind of an update on the state of play with respect to the CARES Act. And in that context, this is obviously the federal program Grant's going to talk about some of the state incentives that are available as of this morning towards the end of the presentation. And we are certainly going to expect more changes and more things that are going to happen. But I think this program still is the fundamental source of a support, direct fiscal support for businesses. And once what we're seeing is that businesses that can kind of tackle this program, figure out where they fit, obviously it's changing a little bit every single week, and then kind of deal with the ongoing issues of managing their employees to make sure there's not issues around COVID-19, finding ways to reopen safely, are in a real unique position to excel in this environment. And as I have been talking to people across the United States, they are very envious of the position that we are in Montana. We have a tax base that it does not have a sales tax in it, and as a result, we have fairly stable. We're in a very stable fiscal environment, and there's a lot of attention and interest in sort of moving from large coastal areas into the Intermountain West because of the ability to telework and work remotely. And so I think as a community, also given our fantastic and literally first-class response around the country to addressing COVID-19 and the leadership that Grant and others have shown in that process, I am very, very excited about what the future brings for Missoula and Montana. And Parsons is happy to be part of that and help individuals and clients expand and really galvanize and take advantage of that moment. So for those of you going back, right, March 27, 2020, the CARES Act. This was the fundamental fiscal response that we received from Congress. There were 4 primary programs that were under that, $2.2 trillion in spending. There were the direct taxpayer subsidies, which have largely went out. There was a $500 billion fund in Treasury-directed intervention funds. I want to highlight this program in particular because on April 30th, we got additional details about a loan facility that's going to be available under this program. It's called the Main Street Loan Facility. There are going to be 3 parts of it, and it is broadly going to have loans that are available for businesses for a variety of purposes. These are loans. They're not like the PPP program that will be forgiven, and they're going to carry an interest rate of somewhere between 350 basis points and 400 basis points. What this program is designed to do is to extend and create liquidity across the banking system. And so our local lenders will be able to offer these loans. They do have some particular strings and uniquenesses to them, but as businesses start to look at their long-term capital needs, this will be the primary facility that they should look at. Again, it's called the Main Street Loan Facility, and there's 3 different types of loans that are available under that. If you have any more questions about the Federal Reserve site has great FAQs and term sheets on what those facilities will look like, and expect local lenders here within the next couple of weeks to begin to be able to make loans under that facility to businesses that are interested in it. Obviously, there's the PPP loan program, which I'm going to talk about some recent developments very quickly. And then there was the various tax changes and appropriations that haven't gotten a lot of attention that I think are important. If you're not familiar with the PPP loan program, here are the fundamentals. I'm going to skip over this slide and talk about how the loan is available to independent contractors or the self-employed. We got rules from Treasury a couple weeks ago. So if you are an independent contractor, right, I drive for Uber or I have a kind of a gig type job, you are eligible for the PPP program. I think a lot of banks were turning people away that were independent contractors initially, but now in this second tranche, we see a lot of these applicants being able to take advantage of it. And we just really want to encourage people to get the word out that the rules are now clear and that these individuals can apply for it. The mechanics of the loan are really a function of using, sorry, Jason, if we go to the next slide. Here's the information on the self-employed, what they need to access the PPP if you're interested. But really, they need to have Schedule C of their 2019 1040 completed, and they're going to look at their net profit number to determine what their PPP amount is. You do get to include the cost, all of your other types of costs, and it's sort of the same eligible expense and use requirement as the larger PPP program. So the PPP program has seen a lot of attention recently with Shake Shack returning its loan with the additional appropriation. And so we're dealing with a lot of clients now in the next week that are trying to decide if the PPP program, which they may have received, was the right fit for them. So what we know today is this: PPP loans that have in excess of $2 million are going to expect significant scrutiny. We also know that applicants were required, and this is not anything new, on April 2nd, the loan application required that they certify in good faith that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operation of the applicant. There's not a lot of guidance on how to make that certification or what documents you might want to have in place. So clients who say weren't operating a hotel where clearly the revenue stopped, but might have been in a little bit of a gray area, need to work with their tax and legal counsel to assess and determine whether or not they made that certification in good faith and they have the relevant supporting documentation. We're expecting significant scrutiny of PPP loans, especially those in the six figures. And so this is a moment where borrowers can kind of reevaluate their position in the program and make sure it was the right fit instead of maybe moving into some of those other buckets like the Main Street Loan Facility for support or the ERC credit, which I'll talk about later. What I think a lot of borrowers went wrong was typically when you apply for a loan with the lender has a role in verifying whether or not you were eligible. That was not the case with the PPP. All the lender had to do was determine that you were in business on February 15th and that you had employees in 2019. If they could make that determination, they advanced the loan. They didn't look at any of the more complex affiliation questions. They didn't look at general eligibility or any types of other issues. And so we do have a safe harbor and this is a good moment for those borrowers to review their application. The other piece that we're seeing now is, so as we talk about it with the PPP audit potentially, the advice that we're providing to clients is one of putting your documents in place today, right? Saving emails with lenders, recalling conversations, potentially drafting memos internally that help to describe and paint the picture of why that PPP loan is necessary. That may mean sitting down and just putting together a diary and a timeline about all of the things that have happened in the last month or before and how the business was positioned or how it was dealing with the literally 24-hour news cycle and changes in the American economy that may have made that loan necessary. I also, now turning from the PPP program, I want to talk about expanded unemployment. So Montana has expanded its unemployment program to allow for self-employed or independent contractors to access the unemployment. For a lot of individuals that are not able to work at all, that were part of that kind of gig economy, I think this is a great option and something that they should be considering. It is important to note that there's going to be a trade-off between going this route and the PPP, at least while you have the PPP loan. And so there are some different tax ramifications of the PPP, which is largely 100% forgiven if you can spend it on your own wages, versus taking unemployment, which is typically a wage that must be taxed. And so individuals should think a little bit about those trade-offs and choosing which program makes the most sense for them. The other big credit that was in the CARES Act that has not got a ton of attention is what's known as the Employee Retention Credit. And so this credit is not available if you have a PPP loan, though we learned yesterday that if you give your PPP loan back, you can now take the credit. So you can kind of retroactively go back and take this credit. And it's available in two circumstances. So if an organization is suffering a partial or full shutdown, this is by a shutdown order, right? So if I am a bar in Missoula that was not able to serve because of the governor's order, I qualify under that definition. Or if I'm an organization who's seen a decline in my gross receipts by more than 50% as compared to the same quarter in the last year, then I'm allowed to also apply for the ERC and apply. Now, the credit amount, if you meet those qualifications, then depends on which one of two buckets you're in. You have less than 100 employees, all wages paid in the quarter that are subject to the gross receipts decline or the shutdown order, you receive the credit. If you have more than 100 employees, it's only those wages that are paid to employees that were not providing service that are eligible for the credit. It's a $5,000 credit per employee, and so it's not a huge amount, but if you're sitting in a position and saying keeping some employees in healthcare, or you did have a shutdown order during that time, this might be a really good option, and it doesn't have the same scrutiny as the PPP. I want to highlight Section 139 of the tax code because the President's emergency declaration made this option available. So businesses that are making payments to individuals that are associated with the pandemic in any way, right? Whether it's child care support or additional furnishings for a home office, those are probably qualified under 139, and they're not going to be income to your employees. So I know a lot of employers are struggling with employee retention at this time. I think 139 is a really helpful tool for employers to use to provide a tax-free benefit along the lines of employee retention. Also tucked away in the CARES Act is that tax-free payments on employee student loans are generally tax-free to the employee if made by the employer. Again, another great provision to help with employee retention. Finally, there are a number of other tax provisions that will be of interest. I encourage you to work with your tax preparer on. Required minimum distributions from IRAs are now suspended if you want to leave your money in the market and not take it out when it's low. You can also take any net operating losses back 5 years, starting in 2008. Especially for C corporations, this has huge arbitrage potential around the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, change in the corporate tax rate. There's also some changes in how you depreciate, kind of a technical fix for commercial buildings associated with tenant improvements. And anybody can now delay the payment on the employer side of Social Security, 50% to 2021 and 50% to 2022. This doesn't apply, however, if you're seeking PPP loan forgiveness. So there's a lot going on in your 941 with also some of the credits on paid sick leave and FMLA leave, and that's going to be a very technical calculation. Thank you, Jason.
Hey, thanks, Ross. Great job. I'm going to now turn the time over to Susan Mott-Schiedler, and she's going to discuss creating a plan for reopening. Susan, your line is muted. Susan, your line is still muted. I'm going to unmute you.
Sorry, I froze up there for a second.
Welcome back. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Susan Mott-Schiedler, and I'm an attorney, employment law attorney down here in Salt Lake. And Utah has a fairly different background right now for its opening than Montana. And when I was reading through Governor Bullock's directives for opening, Montana's reopening is going to look a lot different than Utah's. You guys really have done a great job at limiting the spread, closing down early, and taking those steps necessary to prevent further spread. So, well, y'all have about 550 cases. We have 10 times that much now, and the majority of those cases are located in a geographic area centered around Salt Lake. So the order from Bullock and the directives from Bullock look a little different in what's required, and it seems, frankly, slightly less onerous. But you will want to nonetheless create a plan about what reopening is going to look like, and there are some overarching considerations that you need to think about. The first thing is to appoint a workplace coordinator for COVID-19 issues, and ideally, this person is going to be an HR person or a safety person, but that safety person could be in a lot of different industries, a manager that already has a lot of cleaning and training responsibilities. And this person will function as the coordinator for employees, but also can function as the coordinator for your customers in terms of answering questions, providing guidance, and being in charge of communicating that to the public. You're going to want to address three different areas. I call it the 3 Ps. So physical spaces, people, and policies. Your primary concerns that I'm going to talk about today are going to be cleaning and sanitation. And, the ideal is clean after every person or group uses something. Spacing concerns. So you want 6 feet in between people or groups of people. And then safety equipment or personal protective equipment that are going to be required of people or encouraged. So everyone's physical space looks a little different, and how you clean it and the issues are going to be different. So I suggest people walk through their business, how customers, how employees get to their business, parking lot to the front door, and identify high-touch surfaces, so doors, any kind of cabinets, counters, menus, tables, point-of-payment systems, bathrooms, that sort of thing, that are going to need to be cleaned often. And then also identify your high-traffic and congregation areas. And a lot of those can be waiting rooms, outside elevators, outside bathrooms, break rooms, stairwells, playground areas, park benches. There's so many things that qualify, like where people are going to congregate. Those are also going to be where you want to be concerned about 6 feet apart and cleaning. And then identify spacing concerns. In an office, that's going to be looking at desks and cubicles. In a restaurant, that's going to be looking at tables and spaces in line. So I think we all can go to a grocery store now and know that there are the 6-foot intervals taped on the floor, that sort of thing. And then identify solutions to those problems for your physical space. You're going to want to consult relevant guidance here, particularly if you have not been in an industry or not in an industry that is really cleaning oriented. So I think food and beverage, bar service, casinos, that sort of thing, they're used to cleaning. You guys have a good handle on how cleaners are stored, how they're used, that sort of thing. But for most other businesses, this is slightly new, and you need to look at the CDC website. They have a lot on cleaning, sanitation, and spacing in a business. OSHA will provide information about how to train your employees to use cleaning items and store them, and there's some required postings that you have to use if you use certain chemicals. The FDA has a list of approved chemicals you can use that kill COVID-19 and directions for using them. And then Montana directives and guidelines also are really specific about different industries and what phase 1, 2, and 3 are going to look like in terms of the heightened alert, what you have to clean, what they're suggesting in terms of PPE. And then trade publications have been really good about, and trade groups, about posting trade-specific information. And then for safety equipment and training on how to use the safety equipment, again, CDC, OSHA, EEOC for discrimination or accommodation concerns, and information about what you can require is really good. And then your governor's directives and guidelines are also excellent for establishing what's required or suggested in each type of industry. And examples of what is going to be required: physical spacing, physical barriers, the glass in between people ordering, taking orders, or checking people out, establishing one person at a time, closing waiting areas is a big thing. You want to be able to clean equipment or anything that people touch after each person or group touches it. So doorknobs, counters, like I said, and establish a cleaning protocol where those are cleaned, every 20 minutes if possible. Remove touchable items and remove hard to clean items will make this much easier for you. You can eventually put things back, but right now not. And then safety gear. The order in Montana requires, or the directive in Montana requires masks really for where closed confined spaces don't allow for good physical distancing. So salons and that type of thing. Next slide. And then the second P is people. And if you're not going to do a full reopening immediately, you need to decide who's going to come back and how you're going to decide who's going to come back. And that's employees, customers, and vendors. The employees, it could be on a volunteer basis to make sure that vulnerable populations can self-select out. You can stagger people based on job duties, that sort of thing. For customers, you could go to a reservation-only system, limit the number of people in your shop at a time, that sort of thing. You need to be aware of discrimination. gear. And so if you are bringing back just some people, not all, make sure that you are doing an analysis to make sure that you're not discriminating against any protected populations. And this also applies to, as I said, customers, limit the number, but vendors, so people who are dropping things off, are you going to have special rules for them? Decide when people are going to come back, and that might be dictated by how long it takes you to install some of the safety features. A lot of these are really easy, low-cost things, so spacing and lines, removing items. Cleaning supplies are a big deal, and masks, because they're really hard to get. A lot of vendors are now selling only to businesses, so that's good. Just make sure that you have the proper equipment before you open. Next slide. Again, how you're going to bring them back, what sort of guidelines you're going to put in place to limit the number of people, increase spacing in between those people. You need to decide what's going to be required of everyone. Are you going to require customers or vendors to have safety equipment as well? Are you going to require your employees? Is it going to be on a volunteer basis? And then you need to take a little thought about vulnerable populations. If you do have vulnerable populations that you either serve or have on your employee roster, take a little time to think about how you can protect that person from coming into contact with any potentially COVID-19 positive folks. So that could be moving them to a special area, providing them with additional equipment, that sort of thing. Another important thing is whether or not you're going to require testing and under what circumstances. And decide what you're going to do when you get a positive COVID-19 or if you get a positive COVID-19. Here in Utah, it's pretty much a when you're going to get it. And I think for you guys, it's probably more if. And then training is really an important part of this for employees, customers, and vendors. And employees are a little bit easier access-wise to train. You want to make sure that they know why you're doing this and communicate to them the sources of this information and give them the tools and information to be able to tell people who are coming into your business, like, this is why we're doing this. This is to protect you and us and to prevent the spread, and make sure that Montana maintains this really low number. Next slide. The kinds of safety gear, there's a lot of discussion about the differences between PPE and respirators. So PPE is basically any loose space fitting. You see on the side of the loose mask on the top, there's air that can come in and out on the side. This is primarily to protect those around the wearer. It does have some protective effect of the wearer, but that's not the primary point. Respirators, on the other hand, are actual safety equipment that need to be fitted. They filter the air. They're fit tested. There can be no gaps. And these protect both the wearer and people around the wearer. It is really rare that outside a health provider that you're going to need this kind of mask, but some employees may want to wear it if they're in a higher vulnerability population. They're really hard to get a hold of right now unless you're in healthcare. But both do require training on how to put them on and off without contaminating areas. Healthcare providers need to follow what they've been following, and it's likely that they'll need respirators. Really, personal care facilities in the Montana guidance are the only group that's been called out specifically for wearing face masks when practicable and when spacing is not easily attained, or when people are going to be around each other for long periods of time. Tattoo parlors, hair salons, nail salons. General industry should follow probably federal guidance about masks. And then again, explain why. You want to be able to have your employees talk to customers and let them know what's going on. And then some people will need ADA accommodations if you need these for wearing them close to the face, or religious accommodations. Finally, communication of the plan is really important, and training. Training and donning and doffing safety gear, and cleaning, particularly how long to leave the cleaning supplies on, that sort of thing. And for employees, we suggest you have daily team or safety huddles to discuss the new safety measures and issues with them, and make sure that everyone's on the same page and getting training. You want to distribute policies and regular written communication. And then you also want modeling of that good behavior. For customers, you, if possible, announce it in an email or signs and make sure that everyone can enter in and know what the deal is when they're coming into your business. Signage goes a long way, and then really easy systems to understand. Clean, dirty, here's what I do, here's where I go, I need this much space. And then documentation is an important part of this to make sure that you have the policies and you've distributed them. And then final slide. And these are just the policies that you want to look through. This is not really what I focused on today, but you want to make sure that your policies are in place when you open. You know what they are, and you know what you're going to do when you get, you know what you're going to require of people and what you're going to do if you get a COVID-19 positive test from an employee, customer, or vendor. So thank you. And if you have any questions about those plans, contact any of us. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Lombardo. I'm from the Boise, Idaho office of Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer. In Idaho, we have a number between Utah and Montana. I think we were right around hovering just above 2,000 cases. We have no international airport, and as expected, the majority of our cases are centered around Boise, but also Sun Valley in Blaine County. We have a 4-stage plan. We're hopefully going to be in stage 2 next week, which includes opening restaurant dining rooms. So today I'm going to talk about the testing and screening and things you can do in order to get test employees before they get into your physical space. So first, a little bit on the legality of this. Generally, the ADA prohibits medical testing. So, however, this is a pandemic, and so now the EEOC has said that someone with COVID-19 is a direct threat to your business. So the EEOC has sort of drawn this line in the sand where they said it's okay to test for symptoms, but not medical conditions. So you still are not allowed to ask about medical conditions necessarily, but you can ask and take actions that would tend to show symptoms. So remember that with all of these screening procedures, this is only one tool. And for example, with temperatures, that an employee can still have a fever and other symptoms and not realize that they are essentially a direct threat to your business. So this is just one tool of many. A little more on the legality. Next slide, Jason. The temperature taking and all of the screening should be done in a non-discriminatory manner. So you can't just screen people over a certain age. You can't just screen people with underlying conditions. You have to check everyone's temperatures and check everyone for symptoms and exposure. The medical information that you are taking should be kept confidential in a separate file. Your HR people already know how to do this, but this will be just a little bit of a broader context. And the information should only be shared with people on a need-to-know basis. That generally means you can do things like tell someone's direct supervisor and of why they are out of the office. But for everyone else, you can tell people that someone is on leave, and you should be telling your employees that you're not going to reveal their status if or when you find out if they're a positive, unless you can tell, you know, just a few people, and you can certainly tell the public health agency. And then there's some regulations on keeping logs about that information. So the how-to for taking temperatures, you should have a written policy. We've been developing those and can help with those. It is a little tricky to make sure that you know, it matches up with current policies, and to put in all of these things that I may not get to today. There's a lot of things, little details to think about. So you should set a criteria, and we've seen businesses, I've actually seen one set it for lower than 100 degrees, but generally check the CDC for guidance and decide what is best for your business. Certainly if someone has their temperature taken and they are above or at the cutoff, they shouldn't come into work until they're cleared. It's important to train on the policy and the procedure that you put in place. You need to communicate all of this clearly to your employees in advance, so that they know what's happening and that there are no surprises. We don't want them showing up to see a thermometer one day at work. And along with this, you need to train your facilitators. If you name one person to manage the program, you need to train the testers and provide them with PPE, which is personal protective equipment, and you need to train your employees. And when you've done the training, you should do a dry run to see how it goes. As always in employment law, you should follow your policy and document your actions. So to back up, taking temperatures is one thing that you can do for symptoms, for screening for symptoms. But more broadly, you can screen for symptoms and exposure, meaning you can ask employees, when you call them from home, you can use an app to get information from them. You can ask questions on all symptoms that have been associated with COVID-19. You need to check the CDC and with the EEOC for what those symptoms are. It changes frequently. Like I think the CDC or the EEOC now says gastrointestinal symptoms, and that may not even be on the CDC list, last I checked. Also, you can ask questions on exposure. So if someone has been in contact with someone who's tested positive, or if someone's traveled to a high-risk area. Then there are lots of methods and practical considerations to take into account. You can take temperatures at home. You can take temperatures at work. You should start early to get your thermometers. I think supply chain issues might be getting better on this, but you should buy the kind that does not touch a person. You should buy sanitizers and things to go along with this procedure, and you should get those on order if you're going to do this. If you are doing temperature taking at home, you need to think through how people are going to report that from home. You need to think through what sort of equipment people have at home in order to do this and make it accurate. You need to have a procedure for calling in and reporting the information. At work, there are more considerations. The most important thing is actually on the next slide, Jason, is to maintain social distancing while you are getting your temperature taken. So you don't want everyone on the same shift or everyone at open time to come in and line up to get their temperature taken and have one person be positive and everyone else in line be exposed. Then your whole business can be shut down or hampered for longer than you would like, 14 days. Next slide, Jason. Some things to consider are having people tested outside the facility. before they come to work. Some of these are unworkable depending on what kind of business you have. I don't envision that for example, every coffee shop is going to have a trailer or temporary facility in their parking lot set up to screen all of their employees' temperatures before they come in. But maybe if you are a larger organization or if you're a public entity, you will sort of set up the tent or trailer outside. You need to train the person who is providing the temperature taking. Next slide. And then you always need to remember that there will be issues that come up with when people get their temperature taken and they do not pass. So make sure you have a way for them to return to work. Last slide. And make sure it's clear and follows guidance so that you don't affect your entire office. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Now we're going to turn the time over for our final section to Liz Mellon out of our Missoula office. Liz?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Grant, for co-hosting this webinar with us. It's a great opportunity to share some information with the community. I want to quickly go over the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. There has been so much legislation coming out on the federal level and a lot of confusion about what this act requires. So I've developed a few slides here that can be a reference point for you that gives you kind of the high-level information about the act. If you have specific questions about how to administer the leave that we discuss here, please reach out to your legal counsel. It can get a little bit tricky. The big things to remember is that the Response Act, when it was enacted in the middle of March, it became effective at the beginning of April 1st, and it is effective through the end of the year. What it does is it requires employers to provide paid sick leave and paid family medical leave in certain circumstances related to COVID-19. So this is a sea change if you are an employer. The federal government has never before in the United States required paid leave by employers for their employees, and this is now a new requirement. The basics of the law is that it applies to employers with with less than 500 employees, and that most employees are eligible for both or possibly either kind of leave. There is very limited exemptions for a small business, or is also a limited exemption for an employer of healthcare providers. I am not going over and don't have a slide about the healthcare provider exemption, but know that it is out there if that is something that you think might apply to your business. The crux of the Response Act is that most employers are going to have to pay some sort of paid leave in a COVID-19 situation, even if they only have 1 or 2 employees, even if they have 10 employees. There has been a lot of misinformation circulating in the Missoula community in particular, that just blanket denials that if an employer has 10 employees or less, this act does not apply. That is not true. The exemption is very limited, and we'll go over that in just a moment. But additionally, each employer must post a federal notice of their employees' rights under this act, and that notice can be found on the Department of Labor website. So there are 2 basically buckets of leave rights under the Response Act. The first bucket, this is the paid sick leave. This entitles an employee to up to 2 weeks of pay because the employee is subject to a local or federal quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. They've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine because of COVID-19. They're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and are seeking a medical diagnosis, or they're caring for someone with whom they have a close relationship, like a family member who is subject to the self-quarantine. On that third bullet point about the COVID-19 symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis, remember that as an employer, both of those things are required. That "and" is in there for a reason. So if you have an employee who calls and says, "Oh, I have a dry cough and a high fever and I can't come in," that does not automatically entitle that employee to 2 full weeks off paid. It does not automatically require you to pay for that leave. However, if the employee is experiencing those symptoms and they're seeking a medical diagnosis, you will likely have to pay the leave for that limited amount of time while they're seeking the diagnosis, and potentially longer if the diagnosis comes back positive. So understand it's not quite as onerous as just allowing your employees 2 weeks off with paid leave. The second bucket of leave rights, this is under the Family Medical Leave Act, which if you are a small employer who has less than 50 employees, you've never had to administer the FMLA program before, and it can be confusing and onerous. The basics here, if you are an employer that is familiar with FMLA leave, this does not require paid leave for every FMLA reason. It only allows one additional reason to take the FMLA leave, and then requires pay for a portion of this additional reason. So the leave is up to 12 weeks because the employee is caring for his or her child whose school or place of care is closed due to COVID-19 related reasons. So across the state of Montana, that's the vast majority of school districts that are going to continue to be closed throughout the rest of the school year. This also would apply if summer camp programs are not available or local daycares are closed. This is the only situation where the small business exemption applies. The small business exemption does not apply to the paid sick leave portion, the first bucket we just spoke about. Under the family medical leave portion, if an employee is seeking leave to care for their child whose school or daycare is closed because of COVID-19, and you are an employer who has less than 50 employees, if you have an officer of the company who can certify that there will be significant economic harm which will threaten the viability of your business, if you pay this specific leave, you can apply the small business exemption to yourself. That exemption is decided by you. You do not have to submit any paperwork anywhere. However, you do want to document thoroughly that you fit under one of the 3 factors that are available. Essentially, those factors go to the essence of your business, that you would not be able to operate at a minimal capacity if you either had the financial burden of paying out this leave, or you are losing one employee who has a particular set of skills that makes them vital to the company, or you simply don't have enough employees to cover for that employee if they're gone for that long. In addition, the documentation that you create, that you keep for yourself, should be kept for 4 years related to this exemption. So in terms of eligibility for these leave rights, first off, under bucket number 1, the employee is entitled to their full rate of pay, which has certain caps to make sure that the employer is not paying more than what is available. The second bucket is the employee is only entitled to 2/3 of their rate of pay. The calculation for what their rates of pay are can get tricky, especially if you have a lot of hourly employees who regularly work overtime. If you have salaried employees, it's slightly easier. In terms of eligibility, the bucket number 1 eligibility is immediate. So if you have an employee that you hire on Monday and on Wednesday, they work on Tuesday and on Wednesday they call and say they're sick and they're seeking a medical diagnosis because of symptoms due to COVID-19, they are potentially eligible, and you may have to pay that paid sick leave for that limited period of time. In bucket number 2, for those employers who are used to FMLA, you don't have the large calculation of more than 50 employees in a 75-mile geographic region who've worked a certain number of hours. That's not an issue here. Instead, it's just every employee who has worked already for 30 days or has been employed by you for 30 days. The first 2 weeks of leave in that FMLA leave, though, are unpaid. Only 10 weeks total would be paid if they take leave for caring for a child.
Thank you very much, Liz. I'd now like to turn the time back over to Grant for some closing comments before we wrap up today's presentation. Grant?
Yeah, I think most importantly, I just want to thank you guys again for incredible presentation today. I was being texted in real time from people on the call, just really impressed and grateful for the content. I was also getting some real-time updates that the state programs that open at 8 o'clock this morning, some folks have already been through those and reported that they are relatively easy to navigate. They're pretty straightforward and they seem to be accessible pretty quickly. So I just want to say encouraging signs coming out of the state. The last thing I'll say is that we're expecting a couple of press conferences, I believe on Friday, which given the great conditions we're seeing in Montana, we anticipate will lead to seeing a further announcements about businesses that are going to be able to open in Montana in the coming days and weeks. So stay tuned from those from both the state and our county health department. And again, thanks everybody for being here today. It's been really informative and I'm grateful for the help with Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer.
Well, Grant, thank you very much. And thanks to the Missoula Economic Partnership for all it is doing to help the broader business community in Missoula get through these difficult times. Thanks to all of the attendees for joining us today. We appreciate you being with us. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the webcast today, there will be a recording of today's webinar that will be circulated along with all of our presenters' slide decks. And lastly, I'd like to thank our presenters, Ross Keogh and Liz Mellum out of our Missoula office, Amy Lombardo out of our Boise office, and Susan Mott-Schiedler out of our Salt Lake City office. We wish all of you, your families, and your colleagues the best of health, and we're here to help you get through this crisis. Please let us know if there's anything that we can do to assist. Grant, thanks again for having us.
Thank you, Jason. Take care.
Thank you.